Some
Good evening, all, and welcome to Axanar Confidential number 35. I am your host, Alec Peters, and with me tonight, the best way I can introduce this man is to say I am honored that he is my friend, David Gerrold. David, how are you doing tonight?
I'm in pretty good shape. I just fixed dinner for myself and the kids. Nobody died, so I'm really happy about that.
It's always good when no one dies when you fix dinner.
It's always a success around here. The motto of my kitchen is where there's smoke, there's dinner. So.
Well, how are things going on in California? I miss California so much. Other than the outrageous living expenses, it is wonderful to live out there.
The weather's been good. We are not anywhere near any of the fires, so except for a little bit of smoke in the air, we're in pretty good shape. So we're in the middle of a remodel, so everybody around here is just stressed as hell. I mean, everything's working fine, but you know how you focus on that. Oh, look, this tile got cracked. Oh, crap, they're doing a terrible job. I mean, it's like you just go through this micromanaging thing when you're with everything, and that tends to stress you out.
Now, do you have a general contractor, or are you GCing it yourself?
No, we have a general contractor, and he's high end. He's very, very good. But like with all contractors, you got to stay on. You got to stay on them. So
absolutely. No question about it. Well, good. What are you working on these days, David? Please tell us.
Okay, well, I just finished up a book called Hela, which is a sequel to the Jumping Off the Planet trilogy. And it takes place on the planet Hela when the Jumping Off the Planet trilogy ends with the family on a starship heading out to a colony. So Hela starts on the colony, and it's told from the point of view of a different character. He's transgender on the spectrum and has a chip in his head to help compensate for the syndrome he has. I didn't say what the syndrome is. So he's about 13 years old, and he gets caught up in the middle of a political turmoil while he is, because of his various skills, he's editing videos for the colonists on the ship. They can't. It takes. They're about 4 months just to get into a docking orbit, and then because it's winter and there's storms, the colonists have to stay on the ship until they can come down. So there's a lot of stuff going back and forth, and until some of the colonists do come down, and then the political situation blows up. So it's a pretty good book, and Betsy Walheim has it for Daw Books. It's scheduled for June. And the interesting thing is she's a great editor, and she says, well, what about this, and did you overlook that, and could you answer these questions? And that added about 7,500 words to the book answering those questions, but it worked out fine because it's a much better book, and it addresses a couple serious issues, but it reads a little like a classic Heinlein juvenile, but not, because it's not a young adult book, but you could read it as a young adult book. So I'm curious to see what kind of reaction it's going to get. The beta readers have liked it. So,
well, good.
So there's that.
So tell us what. Let's say over the last 20 years, where do you spend most of your time professionally? Is it on novels? Is it on short stories? Where do you? Is it on Facebook? Where do you spend most of your time?
I spent a couple years working on a couple TV pitches. I did an enormous number of short stories. I'm still doing short stories. So many that the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction did a tribute issue to me, which is really an honor because you can't campaign for that or there's no votes, and the editor decides you're important enough. So there was that, and then Hella is I've done 3 novels, and I'm working on a 4th and a 5th. So I go back and forth between all of the different projects, and I think that's one of the things that keeps me, I don't know, what's the word, flexible or challenged, that if I'm doing a script, I have to think, what does it look like on the screen? If I'm doing a short story, what's the punchline? If I'm doing a novel, what are all the things I need to develop between here and there? So I think it keeps me from falling into a rut.
Short stories too.
Yeah, short stories. The short stories are all over the map. There's you can go on Amazon. There's 13 O'Clock, which is which is a breakthrough in language and content. Then there's Monsieur, which is the first chapter of Jacob, a novel, and that's me playing with the whole vampire mythos, which, you know, I think most people don't do vampires right. And
Why don't
and
they
then
do
there's
vampires right?
you have to read the story, because that's part of the story. The story is told from the point of view of a writer who meets a real vampire, who tells him, look, it's this, not that.
Oh, that's great. Okay. And that's called?
Jacob is the whole novel, but the first chapter is a story called Monsieur, which was in fantasy and science fiction. And but then I've done a lot of sillier stuff, like The Thing on the Shelf, The Thing in the Backyard, the Dunsmuir Horror. And then I've done a classic, old-fashioned, you could have sold it to John W. Campbell story called The Further Adventures of Mr. Costello. That's a kind of a sequel to the Theodore Sturgeon story, Mr. Costello Hero. And I got permission from the Sturgeon estate. So, yeah, so I've been trying all kinds of different formats in short stories. I just did one for an anthology, which will be out in December. I forget the name of the anthology. It was very well reviewed. It's short stories, alternate Beatles. And my story is about the Fantastic Four, is that an overdose of gamma radiation turns the Beatles into the Fantastic Four. And, of course, Ringo, of course, is the Thing.
Of course.
And John Lennon, of course, is the Human Torch. George Harrison, of course, is invisible. And Paul is Plastic Man. So it works out very, very good. And I couldn't figure out the villain. So I ended up having them be interviewed for the Rolling Stone. Only I called it Rolling Stoned. So it reads like an interview, and all the way to the, you know, to why did you guys finally break up? And they say, well, I think we all needed me time, you know, whatever. Anyway, it was just it's a funny little piece. So, but I got to have fun with it. The more you know about the Beatles, the more you'll get the in-jokes.
Oh, I'm sure, and that is right down your alley. Just as far as time goes, I mean, because let's say, I was just looking at the photos. I was scrolling through my photos. I found the photos from your 70th birthday party. Was that what it was? Where I you know, I came with John Malchoff already. We came there. What's that?
Yeah, that's 5.5 years ago already.
Oh my God, is it really? So, well,
yeah,
you're 75, so you were in your 20s in the 60s, yes?
Yeah.
Right, so that was prime age for you to be a fan of the Fab Four.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. The funny thing is I was slow coming to the Beatles. To me, rock and roll was very American, and who are these, you know, interlopers from Britain, kind of. But you know, I appreciated, and I actually bought some of their singles. Like I loved "Love Me Do," but I didn't start buying their albums until Sergeant Pepper was the first Beatles album I bought. I was familiar with all the songs, especially, and I did like Rubber Soul and Revolver a lot, but it was with Sgt. Pepper that I started becoming much more caught up in what they were doing, that they had suddenly transcended rock and roll to reinvent rock. And at that point, I went back to the first few albums and bought them and was listening. And then from then on, it's like, I don't know how many copies I wore out of Abbey Road. It was like I got it on vinyl, then I had to replace it on vinyl, then I got it on cassette, then I got it on whatever, and, the 8-track, 8-track, and finally CD. Is like, it's like, how many goddamn copies of Abbey Road do I have to buy,
All of
But
them.
I consider it one of the absolutely greatest albums ever done, because the first side one, starts out with songs. And you say, okay, there's a song. And then about the time you get to She's So Heavy, it stops being separate songs and becomes a medley. And it's all fragments. And how the fragments fit together becomes an interactive exercise for the listener. And I think what you can see with the Beatles is when you start with the early albums, they're one of the greatest rock and roll bands in the world. By the time you get to Abbey Road, they're one of the greatest blues bands in the world. That's my opinion. Other people can argue. I don't care. So, anyway.
Well, I remember, I was born in 1960, so literally my first memory of the Beatles was when they were playing at Shea Stadium, because we lived in Forest Hills. And my cousin, rest her soul, she just passed last year, she took me up to the top of our apartment building, which way far away you could see Shea Stadium, and all you heard was this screaming. I just remember as a little kid, you couldn't hear any music. You just heard, it was crazy. But that was my first memory.
My next door neighbor had 2 tickets to the Beatles at the Hollywood Bowl, their first concert.
Oh,
and
wow.
he didn't want to go. So I took his little girl.
Oh my God.
And of course we were like, she was like 12. And I thought, well, okay, I'll see who these guys are, right? And this was like, 62? And we were at the top row of the Hollywood Bowl, so all we saw was this glow down there. And all you could see were all the flash bulbs going off like a light show. And you couldn't hear a lot of the singing because of all those screaming. But it was a great evening. I remember a couple people made fun that my date was 12, but, I thought that it was a great, fun evening. And I thought, they played with the audience. But it was a very short set. It was like 45 minutes. Is that it?
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
That's why. I've only seen one thing at the Hollywood Bowl. I saw, before I left, a few months before we moved out, we saw Nightmare Before Christmas there. They have, what's his name? Danny Elfman directs, and he brings a lot of the cast members back, and they do all the songs, and they show the movie. It's really an amazing show. So that's my Hollywood Bowl story. But I also went to Greek. I got to see the Pet Shop Boys at the Greek, and that's a great place to see a show.
I have seen a number of shows at the Greek. I saw Jerry Lewis live at the Greek. I don't remember who else I saw at the Greek. And at the Hollywood Bowl, there was a concert with to raise funds to fight Proposition 8 or Proposition 6, one of the anti-gay propositions. And, let's see, it would have been 1974, so it's probably Proposition 6. And Bette Midler and Richard Pryor,
wow.
and God, I don't even remember who else. Richard Pryor lost his cool, and then Bette Midler came out and calmed the audience down and made the whole thing a smashing success. Wow. So,
yeah, Bette Midler's a real entertainer, right?
Oh, she's the best. She is. I've seen her live several times. I saw her at the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion one time when she was doing the whole. I forget the name of the character she played, but she comes out like a mermaid, but she's in a wheelchair, and she had a whole bunch of characters she played on stage that never made it to the album, but it was something spectacular. And of course, in one of my stories, the Dunsmuir Horror, I do a sidebar about going down to the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion and seeing Sally Rand and Charles Pierce. And Robert A. Heinlein knew Sally Rand. When I saw her at Dottie's place, that's what we called it, she was already 70 years old. She was in great shape. She did the fan dance and the bubble dance. The audience loved it. She was great. So, I mean, she was the true queen of burlesque. So.
Wow. Let me ask you that. I'm going to switch gears a little bit. First, people are asking, and I know you probably can't talk about it, but people are asking about the Dr. Seuss lawsuit. What can, if anything, can you tell us?
You'd have to ask my lawyer. I don't comment on any litigation that has not been resolved, and because I might accidentally say something stupider than usual, and even after it's resolved, I do believe it will resolve in our favor. That's as much as I'll say. But after it's resolved, that'll be all that needs to be said. So that's the polite way of saying no comment.
Okay, fair enough. Let's talk about a little. Have you seen any of Star Trek Discovery?
No. Oh wait, I saw the pilot episode, and I was just thinking about this today. Not Star Trek Discovery, but I loved the original series because it was about exploration. It's all there in the opening narration to explore strange new worlds, seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no one has gone before. This is perfect. But when we get to the movies, and I give Gene Roddenberry credit that he tried to make Star Trek the motion picture, he tried to make it be an exploratory adventure, but Gene had a bad habit. It was always about Kirk meeting God and winning. And that's not... You can only do that story once or twice, and then the audience starts to get bored with it. And the question that has to be asked is, why does God need a starship? But I give Gene credit for trying to break out differently. And then we get to the Harve Bennett pictures, and I love Harve Bennett. I think Harve Bennett is a marvelous man. And but what we got in that entire... except for number 4, which was about saving the whales, in all of those pictures, there's a villain that has to be beaten up. And that's not Star Trek. Star Trek was about making friends with the villains.
Corbinite maneuver.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Star Trek was about avoiding the battles.
Right.
And by the time we get to J.J. Abrams and all of the subsequent iterations, it's all about what villain are we going to be dealing with. Now, okay, the Borg, you get to do some good stories about what is the nature of human individuality. Measure of a Man, is Data human or not? These are good stories to tell. The one, Shaka When the Walls Fell, whatever that... I mean, that was a great writing. Yeah, it's not totally believable, but as a science fiction story, because a culture that speaks only in metaphor is going to have a hard time surviving as a culture.
Yeah, right.
Particularly because everybody interprets metaphors differently. I would have called that one "Metaphors Be With You," but sorry about that. But I mean, as an episode, it's marvelous because by the end of the episode, you understand every metaphor,
right?
And so that you've been taught, you've learned a new language. So there's been a lot of good episodes there where they went back to Star Trek is about exploration. But once you start getting into the subsequent TV series and the movies, it becomes too much about villains. And once you have all these villains, you're no longer seeking out new life or exploring strange new worlds as much as you're getting into fights. And it changes your mindset that Star Trek is about fighting. No, that's Star Wars. Star Wars is about space battles, sword fights, and Shakespearean incest.
We have a
Which
question.
is why the audience.
Go ahead.
That's why the audience has gotten bored with Star Wars. You can't do enough. You can't open that universe up anymore. It's, you can introduce new aliens and new characters, but you're limited to doing a specific kind of story. Whereas with Star Trek, you have a much more broader palette on which to work, if you can work that broader palette. There's very few people who understand how to do Star Trek. And it's very hard for those people to get into a position where they get to do Star Trek. I give James Cawley credit for his Star Trek New Voyages, because as fan films, he's got the spirit of Star Trek just about better than anybody who's been doing those kind of fan films. I have to give him credit for that.
Yeah. Well, it was also, he was wise to use stories like The Child or Blood and Fire, or he wanted to make that Norman Spinrad story. He was mining the gold that was TOS. But listen, we have a question from Michael Weir, who is like our biggest donor at Aries Studios.
Oh, sure, yeah.
He asked, David, who is your favorite narrator? That's an interesting question.
I've always liked Peter Coyote. He has a nice, gentle voice. And I like Morgan Freeman, but, it's the voice of God. You don't argue with Morgan. Whereas with Peter Coyote, you get the idea that maybe he's putting information out for you to consider, and that you're invited to participate. You're invited to think. He's got a gentleness.
And what does he narrate that our audience would know?
I don't know. I mean, that's the only one. The only one who comes to mind, as I said. I watch a lot of documentaries. You know who's good? Your audience should. Richard Attenborough.
Oh, yeah.
Or David Attenborough. David Attenborough, the brothers. I get them confused. David Attenborough he deserves sainthood. I'm surprised they haven't knighted him by now, because his series of documentaries about life on this planet and explaining how this ecology, all the pieces fit together. I could, if you said to me, you can only watch one television show for the rest of your life, it would be the David Attenborough series. I don't care. Whatever he's doing. Sometimes he's a little heavy-handed for me, but I just love when he gets excited about some interesting ecological fact or element.
Okay, fair enough. If anyone else has any questions for David, go and post them up. You don't necessarily have to submit a super chat, but go ahead and... Oh, and Darren says he is knighted.
Oh, that's great. Okay, thank you.
Wow.
It's just I've never heard him referred to as Sir David Attenborough.
So, okay. Cool. So you only saw the pilot of Discovery. What do you think? Do you have any opinion about the upcoming Picard series?
No. I'm in my post-Trek period. I was always, whatever happened in Trek, I was willing to go along. I wanted to see what they were doing, but I was treated so badly, not just by Gene Roddenberry, but by a couple people who felt that they were authorized to do additional bad things, that they pretty much killed my enthusiasm for Star Trek. So I said to myself, and this goes way, way back, to get me engaged in Star Trek, for instance, when James Cawley said, come do Blood and Fire, that would reawaken my enthusiasm for classic original Star Trek. But back in the late 80s, early 90s, I was so distanced and alienated and pushed away and, airlocked, that I said, okay, I've got to reinvent myself and my career as separate from Star Trek. And I decided I'm going to write the novels I want to read. I'm going to write the novels I've been postponing that I want to write. And I'm going to do that other thing that I've been postponing. I'm going to adopt a little boy and be a dad. And, of course, that's a full-time job. And so my writing got backburnered for a while. I don't regret it. Having a son is a much better adventure than just another novel. So I decided I needed to create a career that was totally separate and isolated and distant from Star Trek. Now, I don't hate Star Trek. I'm not an enemy of Star Trek. I don't revile it. It's been very, very good to me. But at the same time, I need to have, if Paramount or CBS were to call me and say, would you like to work on Star Trek? I'd say, make me an offer. And in what position? Because I'm not going back to be beaten up again by anybody. But until that happens, and I'm not holding my breath, I want to establish myself as the very best writer I can be. And my most recent work, particularly 13, 14, 15 o'clock, and Jacob, and a couple other things, short story called Entanglements, and a couple others, are my demonstration that I can be a writer on my own turf without having to be a sharecropper in somebody else's plantation.
But listen, you've been doing that for decades now. I mean,
yes.
War with a Tor, or your Martian Child, about your experience with your son. You've been, I don't think anyone. I mean, Star Trek fans lovingly tie you to Star Trek because of the Trouble with Tribbles. But I don't think, realistically, anyone pigeonholes you who knows science fiction. I mean, you may have become famous because of Star Trek, but you've become a great writer because your work's outside of Star Trek.
Well, yeah, the thing is, in many respects, Star Trek is a cage that you get put into, and you have to work very hard to break out of it. You have to work very, very hard to have a voice of your own, because the way the fanish community works, the reviewers work, and the audience works, is the first thing that they say, oh, David Gerrold, Hugo and Nebula Award winner, who wrote The Trouble with Tribbles. Okay, great. Charlie Finley, the editor of Fantasy and Science Fiction, interviewed me for a thing, and he says, so, David, what do you think your legacy will be? And I said, we already know what the first line of my obituary is going to be. The author of The Trouble with Tribbles is dead. The rest of the sentence, I hope, is something really good, like, shot in the back by a jealous husband, something like that. But, I mean, but at age 92, right? But I really want to. I'm in my post-Tribble period. I love the Tribbles, but a lot of other people have come along and written new Tribble stories. Nobody picks up the phone and says, David, is this consistent with what you established? No, they just go ahead and reinvent Tribbles in their own image. And I had an experience. I'll share the story. We were shooting Blood and Fire up in upstate New York, the Star Trek New Voyages episode. And it was like the second or third day, and we were on the bridge of the Copernicus's burned out starship. And I'm explaining is a very complicated scene where, and Paul Siebert plays this crewman who's been infected with the bloodworms. And I come in and I say, now look, here's what the bloodworms are going to be doing to you, and this is what you have to demonstrate. And this little voice from the back, and the set is darkened because of the very dramatic lighting. This little voice from the darkened back of the set. Excuse me, Mr. Gerrold, but that's not canon. And the entire set fell silent. And there must have been 30 people, the camera crew, the lighting crew, the makeup crew, the prop crew, the set dressers, and there were like about 7 actors, and the entire everything went silent. And I said, I made up the goddamn Regulan bloodworms. They'll do any damn thing I tell them to. And that's how I feel about the Tribbles. But other people have been rewriting Tribbles for a long time, and I wish they would just at least, say, David, we know you established this. How do we make this work? But there's, they consider what I did as work for hire, and they own the Tribbles now. So
all right.
That's another story that goes into an area I can't talk about.
Fair enough. And by the way, fans notice, some of our viewers notice that I'm holding Pee-wee, our little rescue Chihuahua here, and everyone knows that he became really attached to Mojo, our last foster dog, as you all know, and he's been, since Mojo left, went to our good friend Shane Freud in Seattle. Pee-wee has become very, very attached. He does not want to leave my lap. He misses his buddy Mojo. Anyway, Dirk Otto says hello from Germany. Dirk, thank you for staying up late. We greatly appreciate that. So, David, here's a question for you. Tell us, who are your 3 or 4 or 5 favorite writers? Not just science fiction, overall, 3 or 5 favorite writers.
Well, let's see. And this is not in any specific order. Obviously, Heinlein, Spider Robinson, John Varley, Joanna Russ, Zena Henderson, there's Jack Vance, there's Theodore Sturgeon. Well, Sturgeon, some of his work, not all of it. Same thing with Kim Stanley Robinson. Some of his work is just mind-boggling. Some of it just didn't work for me. I thought Dan Simmons' Hyperion was brilliant, but I never got around to reading the second book in that series. So, because it's a tough slog. There's a lot of book there. There's too many really, really good writers, and I can't keep up with all the new people coming along. And because, if I could keep up with F and SF, every issue, there's 2 or 3 stories that knock me on my ass.
Really?
Well, there was the Guide to Fruits and Flowers of Hawaii, which was a brilliant vampire story. And of course it won a Nebula. So, and I can't remember for the life of me the author's name, but if I could remember, I'd be seeking out more of her work. I'm trying to keep up with, the good stuff, but there is more. When I was a kid, I could keep up because there wasn't that much science fiction. And I was all caught up by that. I mean, literally all caught up with everything that had been published because that's how little there was by the time I was 20. By the time my generation or the boomer generation came of age and started writing science fiction, it was too much to keep up. And, it's like, do I want to spend 2 hours writing or 2 hours reading? And of course, the writing always took precedence because I knew I'd be writing something I was much more engaged in. So,
all right, so here's some obvious omissions. You tell me if they were purposeful or you just forgot. Asimov. Not a big fan?
Purposeful.
No,
I think Isaac was a great scientist, great at making science readable. And he did a couple stories I admire a lot. I loved The End of Eternity. But when I picked up the third Lige Bailey novel, I had to give up very quickly because as his prose style was clunky. And I blame Theodore Sturgeon, who taught me about the rhythm of language is how you create a flow for the reader. And Asimov's sentences didn't flow. They just didn't feel right to me. There's a couple other reasons why I admire Isaac for the impact he had on the field. Okay, and let's leave it at that.
Fair enough. Arthur C. Clarke.
Loved him. I forgot to mention him. He's not writing anything new these days, so I can't follow him anymore. But I love The Fountains of Paradise, Imperial Earth. Most of his later books were, it was as if he had moved to a much higher level of storytelling. Fred Pohl, I forgot to mention Fred Pohl. Fred Pohl could do nothing wrong. He was a great editor, a great anthologist, and a brilliant, brilliant writer. I don't think I've ever read a book by Fred Pohl that wasn't wonderful. There were a couple that annoyed the hell out of me, but that was deliberate.
Good. What about
Slow Year? The one where that it just ended on such a downer. Slow Year, it's something where the planet is moving away from, has been grabbed by some kind of alien. The whole system is being moved away, and of course now no ship can reach them anymore, so they're totally isolated. And there was the other one where the planet was infested with this thing that turned people's brains to cottage cheese, and not everybody. So every time a spaceship arrives, some would survive, but some wouldn't. So
John Varley,
and they wouldn't tell anyone.
Did John Varley? He wrote Millennium, didn't he?
Yeah, he wrote the Millennium, which Doug Trumbull did as a movie, and it was turned out very good as a movie, but it was a very frustrating film for audiences.
Having read the book first, I enjoyed the movie.
Yeah,
Cheryl
me too.
Ladd,
Because I knew what was coming.
Yeah, right. So it was. I thought it was interesting. Not to be confused with Millennium by Ben Bova. There's another author you didn't mention, Ben Bova. Purpose?
Ben is a consummate scientist, and he writes a very methodical kind of science fiction. And I love Ben very, very much. I would never say a bad word against him. I actually hired him to do scripts for Land of the Lost, so that's how much I admire him.
Wow.
And he did a very good script, but I never was able to get that deeply into. I had his whole a shelf of novels. He went to every novel about every planet in the solar system.
Right. Yeah.
And I haven't been able to get into them, and it's just. I haven't read enough of his work, and that's my fault.
Right here on my bookshelf, here I'll show everyone my bookshelf up there. Some of my favorite. There you go, and you can see in the upper left there the first two books, Millennium and the Kinsman Saga. I read Millennium way back in early '80s, I guess it was, and just thought, God, it was just. I don't know. It was different science fiction because it was dealing with our near future and things that you could actually grasp, And Kinsman, the main character, Ben Kinsman, is the first man to kill another man in space, which I thought was, wow, that's a real interesting point to take off on, because it's always, the first spacewalk and the first this, but. I've always.
Ben did a marvelous story for Dangerous Visions about zero-G sex, and he nailed it accurately. That without gravity, it's hard to get leverage. So there are some positions that will work in free fall, but I'm not going to go into that.
Okay. Another author you failed to mention, and I know I'm going to give you some time to talk about it. Harlan Ellison.
I love Harlan as a man. Now, actually, I have to say it this way. Harlan is notorious for some egregiously bad behaviors. And his amazing ability and his passion and his ferocity for integrity mitigates a lot of that for me. Harlan saved my life once, literally saved my life once. So
wow.
I'm not going to go into details, but I'm simply not I have a relationship with Harlan that is mostly love tempered with a bit of eye rolling. Okay. I think Harlan is a genre unto himself. And, if you read his work in chronological order, you will see the growth of a human being. You will see him growing not only as a writer, becoming more and more skilled with the language, but you will see his growth philosophically as well. And you will see the passion unleashed. Towards the end, I think he was being much more meticulous and maybe a little less passionate. It's hard to say. But there's a lot of work he did that you read it and you go, what's the point of this? Like At the Mouse Circus. And I think I read it 3 times. Like, I don't get it. Bob Silverberg hated it too, so all right. And yet there are stories he's written like, and I was never a big fan of I Had No Mouth and I Must Scream, but Repent Harlequin, Said the TikTok Man. Love it. Along the Scenic Route, love it. Pretty Maggie, Money Eyes, brilliant. So he was prolific as hell. You could not keep up with him. And I think where he really had the greatest impact on me is not as a role model. Yes, some of the things not to do, but I think his greatest impact was his Dangerous Visions anthologies, because he inspired writers to be better than they thought they could be, and his commentaries, his columns and essays. I think those are far more important in the long run, because he comes right out and says, this is the way it looks to me, and this is what we're doing wrong, and this is what we should be doing. And as much as I admire the stories, and I do, Harlan is a buffet where sometimes you love the buttered carrots but you don't want the broccoli, okay? You're thrilled with the prime rib, but really the pickled mongoose is not something you're going to put on your plate. But the thing about Harlan is he was always challenging himself. I will say this, at the risk of him rising out of the grave and slapping my face. I think his script for City on the Edge of Forever is brilliant. And I also think it needed to be rewritten because it is overwritten. It's brilliant, but it's unfilmable. Dorothy Fontana did most of the rewriting. Gene Roddenberry took the blame, but Dorothy Fontana did a lot of the rewriting to structure it so it'd work as a Star Trek episode. She never wanted that made really public, but at one point she finally did confess up to Harlan. So.
Well, I have
she just didn't want him back. She didn't, for 40 years, she didn't want him pissed at her.
Hold on, I have to get, hold on one second. I have to show, since we're talking about
we'll just put Petey on. Petey.
Then, as we're talking about it, because, for me, books are not just something to read. I really enjoy collecting. Oh, let me get it untangled here.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I would love to have a house big enough to keep every book I've ever had, but there are times when, oh, yeah, I have that.
Yeah. And
I think I contributed to that.
Did you? Oh, well, maybe. It's amazing because it really does. It's as an outsider. Now, I met Harlan through you at your 70th birthday. I always felt Harlan misplayed. And who am I to criticize Harlan Ellison? But I always felt he misplayed the story or the criticism or whatever about City on the Edge of Forever, because it was a great opportunity to say that, yeah, look, I wrote this amazing story and people love it, but you know what? Yeah, it wasn't quite filmable. So I respect, Gene for what he had to do. But it was always like a battle with him. It's like, and I felt like Harlan, it didn't have to be a battle
with Harlan. Everything was a battle with Harlan. And that goes back to, that little 13-year-old kid, Shaker Heights, Ohio, being bullied by being beaten up for being a little Jew.
Yeah.
And his entire life was about getting even. He had to be the best in everything. He had to win all the awards. He was driven by that. And once I understood, let Harlan be Harlan, And I was like, okay, I can go up to Harlan's house and get a, performance of Harlan for a few hours. I'm just going to stop by for 15 minutes. 3 hours later, we're still laughing. But Harlan's insights were so valuable. And actually, as an editor, he was better than every so often I'd have a story in FNSF, and he'd call me and say, David, this paragraph of your story, why did you do this? Or he'd say, this is a good line. So this was an incredible acknowledgement that, one, Harlan was reading my stories, and two, he was paying attention to when I screwed up or letting me know when I was doing okay. And it didn't happen a lot, but it happened often enough that I knew that Harlan was paying attention to me because he regarded me as a very, very good friend. Susan said at one of the memorial services, and where all I did was share stories, Susan said Harlan adored me. And of course, my feeling, I adored Harlan too. And Harlan put up with me when I was a jerk, and so obviously I felt I had to repay the favor. Harlan could be a jerk. I saw him do it. I will tell a Harlan story. He was dating the infamous Lori Horowitz, and somebody who knew her from college said she was bragging she was going to marry Harlan. And I called up Harlan and I said, I just want to report this to you. And he said, well, that's not going to happen. Don't worry about it. And he dismissed it in that charming way. And I said, I don't think she'd be a good match for you, and left it at that. And of course, a month later, they were married. And 6 months later, he booted her out of the house, or she left. She was cheating on him. So when Harlan met Susan, and I had met Susan long before Harlan, when Harlan met Susan and they started getting serious, I said to him, absolutely, she's right for you. She will talk back to you. She won't take shit. And of course, they were married for 25, 30 years. Absolutely the best relationship of his life. He adored her. He worshiped her. She put up with him. She loved him. She's a little bit at a loss without him in her life. But she is just, she was the best thing that ever happened to Harlan. And, but on one of the books he signed for me, he actually wrote, next time I'll listen to you.
Well,
it's really an acknowledgement of that I'm worth listening to by somebody who's very important to me.
That's awesome. Well, here, I'm just going to share, this is my one of the prizes of my collection, and this is the hardcover limited version of The City on the Edge by Harlan Ellison that was done, and it's signed and numbered and in a slipcase, and it's one of my prized possessions, David, because is that
the one with all the commentary by everyone else, or is it just the script?
No, let's see. Yeah, it's the one with all the commentary.
Oh, I might be in it. If I am, I might have a copy of it.
Oh, okay.
I don't know.
I need to get you to sign this too. So but anyway, I treasure this.
It'll cost you $1. I'm charging $1 now for my autograph.
Well,
I might make enough for lunch that way.
I'll buy you lunch. We'll go to.
Okay.
We'll go to the sushi.
All right, then I'll give you the autograph for free. Okay.
I will say that it was a pleasure when John Montrath, everyone, was the one who played Dr. McCoy in most of Star Trek Watches.
I love John. He is so good.
What a match.
And not only that, when my son needed surgery, I called John and he found the right doctor. So it was perfect.
Well, yeah, he's amazing. Doc John's amazing. So Doc John was in LA. We came for your 70th birthday, and Harlan was there, and so at some point, Doc John and I, struck up the nerve to went over and introduce ourselves and to banter a little bit with Harlan, and he was wonderful because you kind of got the feeling that as much as we knew about him, you kind of felt like there was a little performance in there as well. Like, I'm going to perform.
Oh, there was a lot of performance. Harlan loved to be on. He loved to perform. And once I realized that Harlan was going to suck all the oxygen out of the room, it's like, okay, Harlan gets to be the star. So I knew if I invited Harlan to the party, I knew he was going to have a great time, and so would everybody else. And for the most part, he hardly embarrassed anybody. He didn't have to call the next morning and apologize. Oh, he did. Never mind.
Well, he was great. He was great.
He had a great sense of humor.
I got a photo with him, and you know, I said, can I take a photo with you? And he said, sure. You're not going to put it on Facebook, are you? And I would, of course, I would have, but I was like, no, I won't. And of course, I didn't, you know, because I told him I wouldn't do it. So I wanted to honor my word. And until he passed, and then I put it on Facebook and said, you know, look, I had the honor of meeting the great Harlan Ellison.
You know, that is risky. He will haunt you.
Yeah, was that what that was?
Yeah, I was like, come on, with a Harlan, grudges don't end until after the heat death of the universe. So, you know, over here, Harlan was a great role model of things not to do. I looked at the amount of stress that he created for himself and for others, and the amount of feuds he got into, and the number of lawsuits. And I thought, I understand why he's doing that, but it's using up his writing time.
Yes.
And the other thing, you know, Harlan was the world's greatest collector. Very few people have been up to the Harlan house, and let alone know where the secret passages are, right? So, but as it's the greatest collection of kitsch and art and pop culture and comics and everything that you're going to find anywhere on the West Coast. Every wall is covered with brilliant artwork.
Wow.
His collections of everything are marvelous and remarkable. And I was there a few times when the mail came in, and it was like Christmas. There'd be this just stack, and it'd be books and books and comics and books and reviews and magazine issues and all kinds of stuff. And he'd spend a half hour or more going through it, and then this has to be cataloged, and that has to be shelved, and this has to sorting. And I realized this man is a prisoner of his collections. And that was one of the moments where I said, I must stop collecting. Now, obviously, it's hard for me to stop collecting. I have a large collection of this and a large collection of that. But I don't object to having a large collection of movies on disc, because that's a library. But there was a point where I realized you get owned by your belongings. And I really wanted to create a more minimalist life around it. Of course, let me show you something. See if that shows. Now, I'm cheating here because we're remodeling, so I had to pack up everything out of one of the rooms and put it in boxes to get it out of the way. But that should give you, I have not won my battle against my own collections, but I'm working on it.
Yeah.
Well, so, I've got stuff that I say, I could auction this off at LostCon, but if I wait and do it on eBay, I might get a lot more. I was like,
well, here's.
Do I want to get rid of it? Or yeah.
Yeah. There's my book collection. There's my Chotskis.
Yeah.
There's right.
Yeah, I've seen your house. Yeah, I've seen your house.
Yeah, that's right. You know.
Yeah, you got to hire someone to dust for you. See, and I was at my most productive. I was like 25 years old. I was renting a room in New York. And I had a typewriter and a ream of paper and a change of underwear, and maybe a half dozen books. But I wasn't getting any reading done. But I would get up every morning and I'd write a chapter, and I'd usually be done by 12 or 1, and then I'd go out and get some lunch, and I'd be free for the rest of the day. And it was a very pleasant life because I was writing and selling and supporting myself. And I was getting a lot of necessary me time, but I finished something like 3 books in the space of 9 months. So, having all of these other distractions in your life, they get in the way. if you're really committed to writing or your artwork or whatever it is, practicing your ukulele, whatever it is, the more stuff you have in your life, the more opportunity for distraction there is. You're not ever going to be, the possibility of being a jack of all trades is gone, which I once thought, that's how you get to be a Renaissance man. But at some point, if you want to be good at something, you have to invest the time and energy into being good at something. And there's, you need your 10,000 hours of muscle memory.
I absolutely agree. Well, I think, for guys my age, I'm 59 and I have friends who are in their 50s, and everyone seems to have that same, like, oh, we're kind of done collecting. Like, can we minimize the stuff? Because it's not enhancing our life, right? And once you get a room full of stuff, you're like, I got no more shelves. If I'm going to bring something in, I get rid of something. There's just, I'm not interested in having a storage unit. So, anyway. All right, let's look real quick. Jeff Fagan asked this question. David, were you there when Harlan won the award for the screenplay for City on the Edge of Forever? And he apparently made a speech that was memorable in front of Roddenberry. Do you know this story?
I don't remember if Roddenberry was there. I was there when he won that Hugo, and there's a story behind it that I've never told. First of all, he'd been campaigning for that Hugo all summer long. Trouble with Tribbles actually tied for City on the Edge of Forever, but the convention committee, and I have this from 2 or 3 sources, withheld their 3 votes and broke the tie in favor of Harlan rather than give out a second Hugo, probably because I don't know what their motivation was, but I was a newcomer. And I was told this, and I thought, what do I do, file a lawsuit? And then I thought about it and said, I'll always be the guy who sued the Hugos. No, I don't want to do that. Even then, I was starting to learn the lesson about public relations. Is that, I don't have any hard evidence. I only have the couple people, and I don't know that they're going to testify in court on my behalf. And I don't want to rip all fandom apart because I'm still a newcomer, and the hell with it. I don't want to make an enemy out of Harlan. And Harlan needed that Hugo because he needed to win something against Roddenberry. But he also won the Writers Guild Award for his script. I personally, and this is just me, I think if he felt that Roddenberry had ruined his script with the rewrite, he shouldn't have accepted the Hugo. He said, I can't accept this because it doesn't represent what I wrote.
Right.
No.
PJ from Orville Nation, such an honor and treat, Alec and David, just to be listening live to this interview, only on Axanar channel, of course. Thank you, PJ. We appreciate your $5 super chat. And Ron Bell sent us a super chat. David, did you ever work with Doug Drexler?
No. I know Doug. I think he's a terrific guy. I just have never had a chance to work with him.
And Doug Drexler's working on the Orville now. Have you seen the Orville?
Oh, I love the Orville. They were off to a rocky start, but once they got their footing and toned down the juvenile humor and just started telling really interesting stories and exploring the characters, it's the best Star Trek series since the original.
It is Star Trek. We talk about it and we were just like, people say, oh, Axanar's like the best Star Trek fan film. I'm like, second place to the Orville. That's what Seth MacFarlane and I have in common. The one thing Seth and I have in common is we both made Star Trek fan films. His is just a much more expensive one, and he's got. Don't forget
Galaxy Quest. Don't forget Galaxy Quest.
Galaxy Quest is awesome. That is truly amazing. Which is supposed to be in a series being developed for Amazon. Real quick question: what do you think of all the streaming services, and where do you think we're headed?
Well, I think some of them are going to fail because for a while, you would go to Netflix or Amazon and you'd get everything. And if you had both, you saw everything. So Disney and Apple and CBS, everybody says, gee, look at how much money Netflix is making. Let's carve ourselves a piece of the pie. So they take their stuff away from Netflix and Amazon and set up their own streaming channel. And Netflix is doing, and Amazon are both doing original programming, but Netflix, for example, is in an untenable financial position in that if their membership erodes, they're going to have a hard time paying their $80 billion debt position. Disney will survive because, the theme parks keep the movie studio alive. The movie studio provides blockbusters and more rides for the theme park. So there's this, and of course, the real money for Disney is all the merchandising.
Sorry.
And the Broadway shows give them gravitas. And then you have Apple. I don't know what's going on with Apple yet. It's too early to say. But you have all these different services. And me, as a subscriber, is like, okay, I have Amazon Prime. That's great. And I have Netflix, so I'm going to keep Netflix. But do I want to sign up for CBS All Access? No.
Right.
Do I want to sign up for Apple TV? No. Although I know there's a couple shows on Apple TV I do want to see, like For All Mankind,
right,
which has gotten some good reviews.
Yep.
And Disney is offering me, you can sign on now for $5 a month for the first year. But there comes a point where you look at the bill and say, well, there's $5 here and $10 here and $12 here. And all of a sudden you look and you're paying $100 a month for 7 different streaming services. Yeah. And you're not watching enough of it to justify that expense. So in one respect, it's like, I think I'll wait until it all comes out on disc, because the disc market is not going away. There are people who don't have bandwidth. There are people who are on the road. There are people who are out of the country. There are people who are in very remote areas. The disc market will shrink, but it's always going to be a very strong niche market. They were making laser discs till the year 2000.
Wow.
They're still making DVDs, and DVDs first came along in 1984. And we're still getting new DVDs. So the market is going to shrink, but it's not going to shrink to the point where it's unprofitable. I think the smart thing for Netflix to do would be to expand it, to make deals with all these other streaming services. We'll pay you X dollars a month to include your streaming service as part of Netflix. And I think that's where some of these people are going to have to go. Some of these services are going to have to go there, because it goes back to Paramount tried to start a network with Star Trek Next Generation. And it worked for a while, but they couldn't generate enough original programming. And eventually they had to merge with CW. And now Paramount is talking about some of their shows as the new Paramount Network. But to establish yourself as a network, you got to know that there's an audience there to support you. And one of the things all these different streaming services have done is, while the market might tolerate a second or a third, the market is not going to tolerate a 14th or a 15th. The market is going to get saturated, and the viewers are going to say, "I can't afford this." Now, if we had a minimum wage, that's where it's supposed to be, that 40 hours a week was a livable wage, people would have the money to invest in all of these separate streaming services, and they'd love them.
Well, I think we got to be moving to a point at some time in the future where we're paying only for the shows we actually watch.
Yeah, that's the a la carte theory. And there was serious talk about Netflix and Dish Network and DirecTV, especially DirecTV, going to an a la carte where you would pay only for the channels you want instead of having to buy a whole package. And there were places like the 700 Club say, "Oh, hell no, if you do that, nobody will subscribe. We won't have any viewers." Damn right. Why would I ever want to watch Pat Robertson, this crazy old man who believes in demons that lesbians have demons in their crotch or something like that. So, and I mean, the thing that I would slap his face for is he says parents should beat the devil out of their children. It's like, this man does not know what it is to be a good parent. Anyway, but yeah, I would love an a la carte system, because I would say I want these movie channels, and I want the Science Channel and the History Channel, the Hitler Channel, and that's what I used to call the History Channel, because all that was, and I still do it. But and there's a Popular Science Channel and Sundance and Science and Discovery and National Geographic. I love those, but I don't want to have to buy a package that includes Nickelodeon, because there isn't anything on Nickelodeon that I want to watch. I
agree. I totally agree with you. Totally agree.
Now, if Sean was still 8 years old, yes, I would have Nickelodeon for him.
Of course. Well, David, what do you work on right now that we should be looking forward to here in the near future?
Well, I'm about to start a GoFundMe probably in the next few days, because one of my dogs needs surgery, and we had a $5,000 hole in our budget, but because several people who owed us money copped out.
Oh,
and
wow!
then,
really? That happens?
Yeah. Isn't that strange? And then there's about a half dozen people who are in worse shape than me, and I want to be able to give them some money too. So I'm going to create this humongous book sale where you'll be able to get just about everything that I've ever written.
Oh, that's awesome.
That hasn't been collected elsewhere. And I'm going back to. I have a sequel to Hella that I've promised to write, but first I'm going to finish editing book 5 in the War Against the Tor, which is called A Nest for Nightmares. I'm halfway through the editing, and then I got pulled off it to do something else, and pulled off that to do something else, and it was like, and I have my to-do list, and I'm watching as things get stacked on top of it, because this has a deadline. And I mean, anyway, so War Against the Tor is up next, and then the sequel to Hella, which I don't have a title for. It'll probably be Hella 2. No.
The Wrath of Heller.
Yeah.
All right. Well, listen.
Son of Hella.
We need to wrap it up. It's been over an hour. Wonderful as always having you, David. I miss you. We look forward to seeing you. Crystal said to say hi.
I love Crystal. I put up with you, but I love Crystal.
I always know that. I'm just a delivery system for my girlfriend. So
yeah.
So listen. It's great as always. Thank you, David. We wish you well, and I look forward to seeing you in the very near future, maybe at San Diego this summer. And until then, as always, for you and everyone out there, all of our fans, you just popped out of your frame there.
I'm still here. No, I am here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, Thank you for inviting me.
Listen, a pleasure as always. The fans seem to enjoy it. Thank you all the fans who joined us tonight. We want you all to have a very good and safe weekend, and we will look forward to seeing you all next Friday on the next edition of Axanar Confidential. And if you are a Patreon donor to Aries Studios being the sound stage.
Oh, can I interrupt?
Yes.
Anyway, I have a Patreon page as well, and anybody who would like to visit patreon.com David Gerrold is totally invited. I'm publishing a lot of fun stuff there, and also my usual essays and rants. There, that was the commercial. Yeah. Okay.
When does that happen? Come on, say it ain't so.
Have you not been paying attention?
I pay attention. I'm being sarcastic. Yeah. Yes, you are the king of the ranters. We bow before you in the ranting. In the ranting expertise. So check out David on Patreon. I will say that thank you all. We had a bunch of new Patreon donors today. We are at an all-time high. Let me just check what it is. We have 264 patrons, which is a record for us. $2,443 a month, which goes towards our $4,000 worth of expenses. So thank you very much, everyone. We have a Patreon exclusive live stream tomorrow night, so only for Patreon donors. So if you are not already a Patreon donor, go to patreon.com/Aries Studios and join the studio fund. So thank you very much. Everyone, we appreciate you all as always. Stay on and chat as much as you like, and we will see you next Friday. Thank you to David Gerrold. Live long and prosper.
Okay, so you'll return my